Let's talk about the global environment for Trump.
I think let's start off with the positives. I'd say the positive take here is that Trump is obviously much more pro-innovation, pro-technology.
Moving to the negatives, America First and the MAGA movement. When I look at it from if I was American, I think it makes a lot of sense, but as a global player, I think that it's a natural market disruptor.
I think the other angle here is the migrants. I mean, that's huge, right? Trump wants to deport millions of people back to Latin America.
Brazil is the third country that searches more Bitcoin in CoinMarketCap. The Argentine government is implementing different measures to put the different currencies to compete. Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Frontera, the podcast where we analyze the trends of what's happening in crypto in Latin America. I'm Mab, co-founder and CEO of Bando and Espacio Crypto, and I'm here with my good fellow Kush. Kush, how are you, man? What's happening today?
GM, what is happening? Everything is happening, man. It's been good. I know you're currently in Miami right now. I'm excited to kind of jam with you a little bit more on what's been going on in your world. We got lots of things unfolding in our end as well. But yeah, man, another exciting week in Latin America for crypto. But Ab, tell us where are you right now, man?
Dude, currently I'm in Miami. We are at the demo day of Outlier Ventures. Today I'm pitching in front of a couple hundred people and investors. We're about to start our fundraise and it's pretty exciting. You know, we've been working on this project for several months. We're ready to do the pre-seed round. I'm really grateful. You're an angel investors of ours. We've been growing since you've supported us since day one. So we are in this moment where we're gonna bring some institutional investors to help scale Bando, make crypto spendable, make this product take it to another level. And how about you, man? How was this week at Acelera?
This week was awesome, man. So we had Fernando Martinelli, co-founder of Balancer, come in. We're having Glenn, who's the BD lead at Alchemy. It's PMF readiness week. So we're just talking about, how should you be thinking about conducting market research? How do you fit your product in order to kind of line up with the market needs that you're exploring in the space as well? Talked a lot about how do you separate in an industry that's full of incentives, separate what people are just here for the airdrop and what people actually want your product. Because oftentimes those two lines get sort of blurred. So that's been really interesting, and I think something really unique in this industry. We had Pedro, the co-founder of Talent Protocol, also come in and talk to us. So it's been just like a super very packed week. Lots of learnings, lots of insights, and then we also had Gabe, who is a DeFi lead at Mantle, who came and just kind of shared some insights. He basically scaled the chain from like zero TBL to billions of dollars. So has a bunch of unique insights on how do you attract liquidity and capital. But yeah, man, I mean, I think one of the things on the angel investing piece that for me was very pertinent when I was thinking of being able to support you guys in the Bando journey was given that Espacio Crypto is the biggest podcast in the Spanish speaking world when it comes to crypto. I think there's just something really important about being able to work closely with communities and having that distribution angle and having from day one like thousands of people that are cheering for you guys and are willing to use your product. And I'm sure, I'm curious, in your early days, because I know you've been pivoting as well with Bando and have now landed sort of on a new idea. But I'm curious, when you launched your first sort of beta version of the product, how did you engage and leverage the Espacio Crypto community?
Yeah, so classical textbook example on how to leverage a community. So we created a private Telegram group where we invited some of our power users of Espacio Crypto community and told them, okay, so this is a new product, test it and let us know how it goes. Tell us all your direct feedback. We did a soft launch for 1 month. We got a ton of bugs. We identified how users were interacting with the product. And then we did the first launch with Espacios, with the community of Espacio Crypto. And actually we've seen people behave, and obviously they are the most retained users. Like the product is really sticky once a user sees the value of a community. So based on those insights, we started iterating, and now we landed in this payments protocol, going global, increasing our ambition, increasing our scope, increasing the product that we are building. And it's really exciting because now we're going global. We're going to execute this product in different areas in the world. And we've seen that the user, like the crypto user in the emerging market, is really similar. So people in Latin America that are crypto savvy and crypto natives, they have really similar behaviors than people in the Philippines, in Vietnam, in Africa. So we've identified that there's a big demographic there. And I think that there's a huge opportunity for payments around the world in crypto, specifically in emerging markets, because in more developed markets, people see crypto as an investment, as an asset to invest. And in emerging markets, a lot of people see crypto as an asset to spend because they receive it because they need to support their families. So we're focusing on that niche. And actually, I think that aligns a lot with your thesis of basically being a LATAM maxi, because here we have the need. On your experience, on what you've seen these weeks with accelerated startups, how does this LATAM demographic fits for a crypto startup? What are the main differences that LATAM crypto users have to other regions of what you've seen with the startups that you're working with?
Yeah, we so interestingly, I think there's a couple of different like threads to pull on there. But I'd say about 70% of the teams in the cohort are DeFi related. I love DeFi. I think it's like one of, if not the most important use case for crypto. And it always sort of irked me and bugged me when a lot of the kind of OGs that came into the space for the public goods and the open source, perhaps oftentimes turned a back on DeFi, just given how important and crucial it is for like people in emerging markets such as where you and I currently are. Um, so we've seen quite a few DeFi teams, and I think it's just a response to what the banking infrastructure looks like. I mean, I previously had done a walkthrough of what it was like to get a bank loan versus a DeFi loan, right? And it was an order of magnitude cheaper to take out a DeFi loan. Um, Capital efficiency was about the same. Time to actually acquire the loan was faster. Like it was literally like an order of magnitude better experience using DeFi than taking a loan out with a bank. And so again, it just doubles down on this thesis of like DeFi is super exciting, and I think it is the biggest reason that crypto I think will genuinely take off here in Latin America. It already is the case, right? Savings, being able to kind of safeguard your assets, right? And so I think it's just important for kind of the audience, and if you're not from Latin America, just kind of keeping that in mind as you're thinking about that. One thing though, Ab, that you mentioned, right? So you guys started off serving Latin American users, right? Specifically in Mexico, and now you pivoted to a global market. Talk to me more about that decision to pivot away from Latin America, or perhaps not necessarily away, but open up your funnel, right? Because I think that's a really interesting decision to make.
Yeah, so what we realized is that the key insight is that the crypto user in emerging markets is really similar across the world. So we obviously had this hypothesis that Spanish speaking users had a lot of different overlaps. People in Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, we could use like the same approach to address them with some subtleties, because obviously each market needs to have its own focus. But when we started talking with people from other parts of the world, we realized that they basically faced the same problem, right? So based on that, we saw that we could extrapolate this user persona to build a global product. That's the first part. Then the second part is that also part of the model that we adjusted is that it's going making crypto spendable. That's our mission. The way that we orchestrate liquidity, it delegates a lot of the fiat connections to some of our partners, and if we did that, it makes a lot of more of sense to go global, because the infrastructure that we're building it can be used in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa, in Europe, everywhere around the world. So if we focus on that part of the stack, that it's connecting the fintech stack and the crypto stack as an infrastructure play, and the user persona is similar across the world, it's basically narrowing down to Latin America would be segregating a lot of the market. So like in our founder history, we focused in this really specific user persona in an emerging market in Mexico, and now we're ready to extrapolate that to a global user persona in the global south, making payments at a global level. So I think that at the beginning of a startup, focusing a lot on that specific niche is critical to the success of the startup, right? And yeah, that's what we're doing. Really excited of what we're building. And also, if you want to know more about Bando and everything that we're building, obviously you need to subscribe to this newsletter to Frontera. And also, if you want to read our analysis, you can subscribe in there's a button at the end of in the show notes.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is important is like I feel like Latin America is a really important testing ground to explore a lot of initial hypotheses. And then to be able to recognize that, oh, wait, a lot of other emerging markets are facing a similar challenge when it comes to being able to access financial services, better governance products, et cetera, right? And so I feel like Latin America provides like a really great testing ground for that. Then being able to scale that out. And I think the other really interesting angle for you guys is the infrastructure play too, right? Sort of the picks and shovels for financial infrastructure in emerging markets. Because I know previously you were going at the application layer, and now you're saying, well, actually, how do we go one stack beneath that, and not only that, open up the markets, because perhaps the TAM just isn't there for us to become like massively scalable business, right? So I definitely think that you guys have been navigating that search for PMF in a really successful way, and I'm excited to see you continue to be able to iterate on that.
Yeah, it's really exciting. At the end, something that we talk a lot about here at Frontera is that in Latin America, crypto will happen in the backend. And we quickly realized that. And in order to the backend to succeed, we need this infrastructure piece that we're building, right? And man, let's talk about the global environment for Trump after Trump in Latin America. Let's talk about that for a couple of minutes. I see that there's like the global political environment will unfold in a really interesting way. I'd love to get your take on how does the landing of Donald Trump as president will impact crypto in Latin America specifically.
Oof, I mean, this is such a complex question. I think let's start off with the positives. I'd say the positive take here is that Trump is obviously much more pro innovation, pro technology than the previous party was. And therefore, we'll generally start to see a lot more innovation sort of starting to unfold across the region. We just saw this massive announcement from OpenAI and SoftBank and Microsoft, right? Like $500 billion dedicated towards advancing AI in the US. That's huge, right? And I think just I'd like to believe that we're going to, in fact, I know that we'll see just like a cascading of these policies and these investments throughout the region. So I think just from a private markets perspective, I think things will generally be very positive for crypto and just generally technology in the region. So I think that's one angle. Then the regulatory side of the house as well, right, is we'll just start seeing a lot more pro innovation, pro tech regulation, or maybe deregulation, right, sort of opening up the landscape for opportunities in the U.S. And again, we've talked about this before. We basically tend to follow kind of whatever a lot of U.S. policy predicates. Latin America tends to follow quite closely behind. So those I think are a couple angles. I'm curious to see if you've got anything on your end that you would complement on the positives. And let's dive back into the negatives, because I actually think there are some really pretty detrimental negatives that might come as a consequence of a Trump presidency.
Yeah, I always like to see this type of things in a critical mindset. As you said, as a positive thing is if the US government pushes crypto forward, basically all other governments around the world will start at least looking at crypto. Specifically in Mexico, I think this is urgent. Crypto regulation is basically stagnant. It's really hard to get a license. It costs a couple $1 million. So by the US being so forward driven, I think that that's going to pull a lot of the markets in Latin America. That's the main thing. Moving to the negatives, I think that the America First and the MAGA movement, when I look at it from if I was American, I think it makes a lot of sense. But as a global player, I think that it's a natural market disruptor. For example, Trump that is starting to think of and implementing tariffs specifically to Mexico instead of having a capital gains tax. I think that obviously for trade that's gonna be terrible. For fiat currencies, it's gonna be terrible. And if you do like the first derivative on that train of thought, basically it's a great it's a great environment for stablecoins and Bitcoin specifically. So I think that this trend of stablecoin adoption in Latin America is going to grow a lot because of this specific political environment of strengthening the dollar and weakening LATAM fiat currencies.
I'd say in particular, we had this conversation last time, right? Is it going to be local stable coins or is it going to be US dollar denominated stable coins? And I definitely think, especially if inflation is due to pick up, which a lot of these tariffs and more protectionist policies point towards, or the thesis is we may see inflation pick up, right? And the Fed has been acting most recently a bit hawkish. I think that that will also just end up leading people requiring a flight to safety, right? Which will either be Bitcoin or some sort of stable asset, like a USDC or USDT or whatever, right? Ideally, some sort of yield bearing stable coins, which there's a lot for us to explore in that. But yeah, so inflation problematic for the region, but could end up being a net good for crypto. I think the other angle here is the migrants. I mean, that's huge, right? Trump wants to deport millions of people back to Latin America. Um, that is going to basically inject a bunch of workers into the labor force in the region. And we saw when a lot of El Salvadorian migrants were deported back to El Salvador that a lot of gang started popping up, a lot of gang violence started cropping up in the country, and that's where, you know, some of the harshest gangs sort of really started, which makes to some extent like a lot of sense. And so one thing I'm personally kind of quite concerned about is what do labor markets look like in Latin America, particularly kind of the Northern Triangle in Mexico when we don't have as many people going up to the US. And then there's the remittance aspect as well, right? I mean, in Latin America, it's like Guatemala, 18% of our GDP is because of remittances. So what happens when all of a sudden less people are able to transfer remittances back here? We're also losing sort of a substantial portion of our exports, as some people see it as well, right? So there's that angle that's very concerning too, just as far as the state of overall economies. But you know, I think it's just a matter of like, cool, like let's, you know, I'm super optimistic, so I'm always like, okay, let's figure out like we're getting a bunch of, in theory, like quite well talented people, educated people coming back to these countries. How do we leverage that talent for good, right? And how do we encourage
Yeah,
people to like kind of tap into really successful industries and build our economies from that point?
I have a like a contrarian take or a counterintuitive take on what could happen with this migration and deportations. The first one, I think that in the middle term, the political scenario in Latin America is gonna trend towards like more strict governments, something like Nayib Bukele, basically an iron fist on gangs. It's the way that he cleaned up safety and, but well, he cleaned up violence in El Salvador. So that's gonna be something that we're gonna start to see a lot more in Latin America. And also, I think that remittances flows with all these deportations might increase instead of decrease. No, the number of people sending money back to Latin America, obviously, it's gonna decrease, but I don't think that when people get deported, they are not going to be deported as a family. The first step of deportation is deporting illegal migrants, and there's people in a family, like when you understand the demographic of migrants in the U.S. There might be, no, I don't know, 5 people or 3 people that were illegal, maybe the mom, the dad, and I don't know, an uncle. But the educated first generation Latinos are legal people in the US. And those are the people that are more educated. Those are the people that have more opportunities. Maybe some of them went to college. Maybe some of them have better jobs. And the thing is that if they deport their families, maybe they need to stay in the US. And the thing is that they will need to send more money to Mexico instead of sending just to support their extended relatives. They are now going to need to support their close relatives, and they will need to increase the amount of money that they send back.
Yeah, I mean, I think this theory that like we'll see more capital flow. I personally would argue that we'll see perhaps per capita more capital flow south? Because I think the like math checks out there. You'd have to look into the granularity around the percentage of how much money flows from people who have citizenship versus don't necessarily. Like I do actually think that like net remittance flows will go down. I could definitely see per capita remittance flows going up to sort of support that argument. But yeah, I'm curious to like get your takes on kind of the rest of this because I think it's super interesting. And I think if anything, this is the most important thing to like the kind of macro economy for crypto in the region as well.
Yeah, as you know, I've been recently close with some companies doing remittances, and a big insight that I realized is that first generation Latinos, they are kind of reluctant to Latin America, some of them generally, but the second generation Latinos are really proud of their roots and they want to come to LATAM. They want to go to Mexico. They want to go to El Salvador. They want to like reconnect with their roots. You know, that's the classical story of like the first generation is reluctant to their roots and the second generation, they're proud of their roots. So I think that that's a big cultural piece that not a lot of people is seeing because when you understand that and the second generation they deport like Trump deports their grandparents, it's not like they're gonna uh, like abandon them. This second generation might be a lot more educated, as I said. So, and maybe this second generation Latin people have the wealth of maybe 20 illegal migrants. So that's why I think that numbers are gonna check. It's gonna be really interesting to see how it works. And yeah, this situation is, I don't know, terrible, horrible. It always depends on how you look at it. I completely get how people that are illegal migrants that are doing crime should go away of the U.S. They should not do crime anywhere, but it's a really thin line to discuss. So yeah, any final takes on migration and Trump?
No, I'm just curious to kind of observe the data. Again, the people that oftentimes end up taking a risk because it's a risk to cross the border. It's not like you just walk across, right? I mean, if you're coming from South America, you have to cross through Panama, through the jungle of Darien, right, which is a super dense, really pretty tough journey, right? Multiple weeks. These are the pioneers of and culturally just like bold risk takers, right? We're literally losing like the most entrepreneurial, daring people. And so it's a matter of, well, how do we support you and how do we build economies where you have an opportunity to actually like thrive and you're not forced to leave because of violence. El Salvador has been seeing like migration sort of actually returning the other way, people actually coming back, right? And so there's sort of an interesting example there to be studied and be extrapolated, without also kind of going into, we have a long history of military dictators and so forth, right? So how do we avoid that instance occurring, whilst also ensuring we have robust and safe countries?
Yeah, yeah, it's like geopolitics in Latin America are really interesting because we are in the continent of the largest country in the world, the most powerful, and basically I don't know, they beget talent because they beget talent, capital, working force, everything because they're the largest country in the world. Um, okay, so moving on to some really interesting news that happened in Latin America this week. As we said a lot of times, Brazil is a different beast. It's a huge country, huge market in LATAM. And I want to talk about these three headlines that communicate the relevance of Brazil in the world. The first one is that Brazil is the third country that searches more Bitcoin in CoinMarketCap. The first country is the US with 18% of the share of people searching Bitcoin in CoinMarketCap. The second country is India with 8.7%. And then the third country is Brazil with around of 8.4%. So there's a huge demand for crypto in Brazil. The second point is that Statista forecasts that Brazil is going to grow 969% to get to 32 million users using crypto. That's a traditional traditional data source. Statista, it's a really important one. And I think that everything converges with this news that the central bank says that it'll take around 3 years to get a crypto license in Brazil, just because they have such high demand that they cannot handle it. So huge Brazil. I think that this year is going to be huge also for the country. If you were, I know that you've worked with Mantle and other protocols. How would you create a strategy to target the Brazilian market?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about Brazil before, right? I think the fintech market is super advanced there. People just generally have had this kind of mindset of much more pro finance and more financially savvy perspective. Perhaps it's the closer tie with Europe. I feel like Brazil, Argentina are like very closely tied with Europe, so maybe it's derived from that. Um, but I think the important thing is just like relate to people in Portuguese. English is pretty much a substantial amount of the population speaks English, right? So it's just easier sometimes to work there, just given the extent of which people actually speak English. But definitely, Portuguese people just deeply, deeply appreciate that. We've spoken previously about how decentralized the Brazilian sort of economy is, particularly from a tech angle, right? So Rio is more conservative to some extent as far as trying to maintain the tradition and the roots because it's a beautiful city, right? And so they're all like, how do we protect this? Sao Paulo is just kind of powerhouse of finance and capital and industry and so forth. Florianopolis is this like very grassroots community ecosystem. You've got other cities that are kind of also little pockets. I think again, it just depends on what are you trying to offer, who are you trying to tap into. If you're looking for developers, I think Rio's great. Sao Paulo is equally great. If you're trying to go the institutional route, definitely Sao Paulo. If you're trying to just like connect with cool communities and early stage builder, Florianopolis and Rio. So that's how I would generally think about it. But I think it's you did really have to be very conscious of who you're trying to ultimately reach, why you're trying to reach them, and what strategies you're trying to sort of like deploy in the region, right? But yeah, I mean, long Brazil, the
Hmm.
real, not long at all. But given it's seen a substantial devaluation over the course of the last couple of years, but long crypto in Brazil for sure. Hopefully, they don't come up with too many draconian measures like you can't withdraw stables to your self-custodial wallet as they, recently were exploring. But yeah, I'm curious. How about you? Like how would you think about kind of the Brazilian market, and is it a market that like everyone should be entering into and competing over? Because I know there's a lot of folks kind of trying to engage there.
Yeah, I think that maybe the way to enter Brazil, I would recommend people to see Coinbase strategy, because basically Coinbase front run everyone, right? Um, or front run a lot of different crypto companies, and because of that, now they have a couple of licenses they can operate, and if you want to enter today, you need to wait 3 years to get a license. And the way that they've done it, I think that they set up shop in Brazil. They hired a local team. They focus on having a regulatory framework to execute in Brazil. And I think that that's the right path. If I don't know, if you're a Silicon Valley company, a US company or Europe company, and you send your Spanish or your European or American executive to set up shop there, they might fail quick, like mostly 190% sure they're gonna fail. You need people, local people, because of cultural understanding, local connections, and you need top local people, right? I think that one mistake a lot of different protocols do is that they think that the enthusiast that was basically the most loud community member in their Discord can start deploying stuff in Brazil, and that's not gonna work. Like being pretty blunt, I think that I obviously love the community. I love there's a lot of talented people there, but you need to go with the top professionals to do. Like if you have a problem with a doctor, you don't go with the people that it's maybe most enthusiast about. You go with the people that has most experience doing that. That might be like a professional doctor. So yeah, that'll be my advice for global companies in Brazil.
I definitely think there's a massive talent gap. I 100% think there's a massive talent gap, to be honest. And it's because if you're expecting to operate at like a North American, European standard, or Asian for that matter, sometimes culturally, education just doesn't quite. There isn't a match. Even if you're like super bright and intelligent, just communication can come into play, and it is really like being able to have that soft landing partner is always super super crucial. So, but yeah, man, let's move on and see what else we got on the docket today.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect. So the next important news, it's something beyond crypto. It's that the Argentinian government is implementing different measures to put the different currencies to compete. So basically, the basic news is that uh, merchants and regular users are going to be able to decide if they want to use the Argentinian peso or other currencies, specifically the US dollar. So I think that how I read this is that Javier Milei, instead of defining legal tender like that different currencies are legal tender, he's going all the other way, saying anything could be legal tender depending on a couple of rules. And this is really interesting to see how people start using US dollars. Specifically, stablecoins are the most efficient way to use US dollars in Argentina, and eventually something like Bitcoin. And Milei has been vocal about enabling Bitcoin to help people use payments if they decide that. So really interesting libertarian approach. Um, it's risky for maybe national sovereignty, but if you have like a really crappy national currency, really interesting approach.
Yeah, I think the angle here is like, what do you do with your currency if it's massively devaluing, and kind of go the opposite way of what the prior governments in Argentina have done, which is try to massively restrict the kind of transaction of things that are not pesos, right? And just saying, hey, we're going to let the free market kind of resolve this. I don't necessarily think it'll get to a point where people are spending Bitcoin. I feel like that's the one of the big problems with Bitcoin is like, why the hell would you ever want to let it go? So I think that's like one aspect that I think a lot of Bitcoiners oftentimes overlook, and also transactions take minutes to confirm, and it's just like fees can get quite elevated and so forth. So maybe on the Lightning Network, right? But the question is like, how many people actually use Lightning Network? Um, However, I do think that this kind of experimentation and capacity to kind of take a much freer approach to the way economies operate is exciting. And again, I think this is the year of FAFO, fuck around and find out, and see what happens, right? I think we're like, I feel like that's, if I could summarize 2025 into one phrase, it's probably that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That's their approach. And the final news of this Frontera is that um, on Trump's inauguration date, on Monday and Tuesday, I kept looking at the App Store in the finance category. And for the first time, I track this a lot. And for the first time, I've seen Binance as a top four app in finance in Mexico. Who are the top three? Mercado Pago, basically the fintech of Mercado Libre. Mercado Libre is the largest company in Latin America, so they're huge. The second one is BBVA Mexico, the largest bank in Mexico. And the third one is Nubank, the largest fintech in the region. So basically, Binance is competing with these giants in Mexico already. And the thing that it's worrisome is that Bitso doesn't appear in the top 10 places. Bitso was in number 19. So it looks like after years after years of Binance drilling the market and trying to penetrate it and trying to gain market share, they're finally winning. And we've seen this across the world. We've seen this in Argentina. We've seen this in different regions. And it seems like it's happening in Mexico.
Yeah, I think one of the big indicators of are we topping or not is where apps like Binance or Coinbase, when they start popping up as the number one most downloaded app on the App Store, that's a sign for concern to some degree, because it's like the very tail end of retail basically trying to get into the markets. So I think that's like one commentary there. Interesting that it's not Bitso, right? Like why Binance over Bitso? And we have some theories I think we can discuss on the next pod, right? Is what is happening in global markets with regards to these like large global players like Binance and Coinbase and Bybit versus these smaller players, Mercado Bitcoin, Bitso, et cetera, right? So, but yeah, I'm super excited. January is coming to a close here. I think next podcast I'll probably be in El Salvador, so look forward to recording there with you.
Yeah, amazing. And in a couple of weeks, we're going to be in Solana Apex. If you're in Mexico, you should go. If you're around in Latin America or in the US, fly to Mexico. We're going to do a couple of podcasts next week's front. Well, in 2 weeks, Frontera might be posted a little bit later because Solana Apex is on Friday. But thank you, man. Always. Thank you for your insights. Good luck in El Salvador and see you next week. Subscribe to our newsletter. People from Binance, Crypto.com, the Ethereum Foundation are already there. Don't miss it. Thank you for tuning in and see you next week.
Take care, everyone. Ciao, ciao. Bye.